To the Commission's administrative meeting for May 13th, 2020. The Commission will come to order. We have some minutes to approve from last week on May 6th. We'll take a review and approval of those minutes, beginning with Commissioner Richard.
I vote aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Linton?
Aye.
And Commissioner Herman?
Aye.
Thank you. The meeting minutes are approved. Mr. Secretary, the consent agenda, please.
Mr. Chairman, there are 3 items on today's consent agenda. Item number 1 is the application of Independent Energy Consultants, Inc. for a license to supply natural gas or natural gas supply services in Maryland. Item number 2 is the application of North American Biofuels for certification of a renewable energy facility under the Maryland Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard Program. And item number 3 is the request of Peninsula Energy Services Company, Inc. to cancel its gas supplier license.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the commissioners, I will propose that with respect to item number 1, that we grant the company's license to operate as a natural gas supplier in Maryland, limited to broker and aggregator services for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff, and that we direct the company to file notice with the commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in its application. With respect to item number 2, that we approve the application and issue a renewable energy facility certification number, that we direct the company to establish a REC account with PJM Gas within 30 days of certification, and that we direct the company to file notice with the commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in its application. And with respect to item number 3, I move that we approve the cancellation request. The vote begins with Commissioner.
I vote aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Linton,
Aye.
and Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, the administrative agenda, please.
Mr. Chairman, item number 4 on today's administrative agenda is Maryland Water Service, Inc.'s 2019 unaccounted for water surcharge reconciliation for Pinto and Highland customers, addressing Pinto's overcollection and estate undercollection of water costs for 2019. And on this item, for staff, we have Annette Garofalo, Lucy Shea, and Zeke Sushka. For the company, Fred Bugelmans, and also available is Fred Hoover for OPC.
Thank you. Good morning. We'll begin with technical.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Lucy Shea on behalf of staff. On March 31st, 2020, Maryland Water Service, or MWS, filed its 2019 fourth quarter unaccounted for water, or UFW, data, and its 2019 annual surcharge reconciliation as required by its tariff. MWS serves customers in the Pinto and Highland Estates communities located in Allegheny County, Maryland. As permitted in its tariffs, purchased water costs are passed through to customers. The tariffs also allow MWS to add a 15% adjustment to its rate as an estimate of unaccounted for water. Quarterly, MWS submits a statement of the actual cost of purchased water reconciled against revenue collected from customers. A true-up filed with the Commission by March 31st occurs annually. If there are any undercollections or overcollections of purchased water costs, the company is permitted to implement a charge or credit to recover or refund the difference. Staff believes, pursuant to the stipulation and settlement agreement in case number 9212, that Maryland Water Service has met its commitment to strive to keep the annual adjusted UFW percentages in both of its water systems at or below 20%. The 2019 annual unadjusted UFW percentage for the Pinto water system was 14%. And 29% for the Highland Estates water system. Staff concludes, however, that Maryland Water Services operational staff did a satisfactory job of maintaining acceptable unaccounted for water levels within both water systems, and that the actions taken to address unacceptable levels of UFW were appropriate and completed within a reasonable time frame. MWS's 2019 annual adjusted UFW percentage for the Pinto water system was 8% and 12% for the Highland Estates water system. Maryland Water Service determined that it slightly over-recovered its water costs from Pinto and slightly under-recovered from Highland Estates in 2019. Staff recommends that the Commission authorize Maryland Water Service to issue a one-time credit of $7.37 to each Pinto customer and to implement a 12-month surcharge of $2.44 per 1,000 gallons for each Highland Estates customer by accepting its proposed Highland Estates tariff revisions effective May 13th, 2020. The company has consented to a May 13th, 2020 deferral, which is a change from staff's written comments recommendation of an effective date of May 1, 2020. Thank you. And Mr. Sushko and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shea. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Counsel for Maryland Water Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. David Bugelmans on behalf of Maryland Water Service. It's great to see everyone today. MWF supports staff's findings and recommendation on the reconciliation. I'll end my comments there, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and thanks for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Bugelmans. Do the commissioners have any questions? I don't see any questions, so I'm going to make a motion. I move that with respect to item number 4, that we authorize Maryland Water Services Incorporated to issue a one-time credit of $7.37 to each Pinto customer and to implement a 12-month surcharge of $2.44 per 1,000 gallons for each Highland Estates customer by accepting the company's proposed Highland Estates tariff revisions to be effective May 1st, 2020. The vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
I vote aye.
Donald?
Aye.
Linton?
Aye.
And Commissioner Herman?
Aye.
I also vote aye. The motion is approved. And before we move to the item number 5, Mr. Secretary, I neglected to cast my vote for the 3 consent items. I do vote aye for consent items number 1, 2, and 3. So those motions are unanimously approved. Item number 5, please.
Mr. Chairman, item number 5 is Mason-Dixon Solar Center LLC's request to extend construction and operational deadlines by amending Condition 4 of Appendix A to its CPCN in case number 9426. For staff on this item, we have Roger Austin and Peter Woolson. For our PPRP, we have Sean Seaman and Steve Tolson, Ryan Gilchrist and David Bugelmans for the company, as well as Fred Hoover for Office of People's Counsel.
Thank you. We'll begin with technical staff.
If Roger is having technical difficulties, I think I could take this first part.
Thanks, Mr. Wilson. I don't know if Roger's on, so you may want to begin.
Okay, he's on, but I think he may be having trouble with the audio portion. He looks like he's muted.
Oh, I do
I'll
see
start.
him.
I can see him.
Recognize him with the beard. So
Right, that's okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Peter Woolson and Roger Austin on behalf of the staff. On April 28, 2017, the Commission issued an order granting Mason-Dixon Solar Center LLC a CPCN to construct an 18.4 megawatt solar power generating facility. One of the conditions proposed by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Powerplant Research Program and adopted in the Commission's order stipulated that construction and operation of the project must commence within 3 years of receiving the CPCN and must be completed for operation not later than 4 years after receipt of the CPCN. If the project is not completed and operational within 4 years of the issuance of the final order by the Commission granting a CPCN, the CPCN shall expire and no longer constitute authorization to construct and operate the project. On April 10th, 2020, Mason-Dixon filed a written request with the Commission asking for a 3-year extension of the construction and operation deadlines proposed by PPRP as part of its licensing conditions. The company states that the extension is needed due to lack of success in securing a customer to purchase power generated by the facility, and because a significant drop in the solar renewable energy credits, the SRECs, since the issuance of the CPCN have made achieving economic viability for the project challenging. More recently, however, a rebound in SREC prices leads the company to be confident that a power purchase agreement will be negotiated in the near term. Staff has reviewed Mason-Dixon's request and find that there is precedent for granting the 3-year extension and that granting the extension will serve to support the state's aggressive target for 14.5% of Maryland's energy to be generated by solar resources by 2030. Staff therefore recommends that the commission grant the company's request for an extension of the construction and operational deadlines outlined within its approved CPCN, subject to any new conditions proposed by PPRP and the completion and submission to the commission of all required new PJM studies and agreements. That concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I see it looks like Mr. Austin, you're with us now and your mic is live. Do you have anything else to add? No, apparently mic is not working.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner,
would you like to take questions of each party, or do you want to wait to the end?
wait till we hear from all parties, if that's okay.
Okay.
Counsel for Powerplant Research Project.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Steve Tolson, the Assistant Attorney General on behalf of the Powerplant Research Program. I filed a letter on May 8th under mail log number 230160 stating that PPRP has reviewed the request and does not object to the extension, but does ask that if the Commission grants an extension, that PPRP or that the applicant be directed to file an updated site plan and application right before the commencement of construction so that PPRP can determine whether or not there have been changed circumstances that require the original conditions to be amended, particularly if there's a different type of panel used or anything like that. And we believe that that'll be protective of the public health and safety and allow PPRP an opportunity to suggest to the Commission that there be updated or revised conditions. And Sean Seaman is on the line, I believe, but that states what's in our letter, and that's PPRP's position.
Thank you, Mr. Tolson. Counsel for Office of People's Counsel. Mr. Hoover may not be with us. We will move to the company.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, David Bugelmans, this time on behalf of Mason-Dixon Solar Center LLC. I apologize if you can hear a leaf blower in the background, but I can't stop it, so I'll move forward with this. I also have with me today virtually Ryan Gilchrist from the project, who can answer any technical questions that I'm unable to answer. Mason-Dixon supports and appreciates staff's recommendation to grant the 2-year extension to the 2 deadlines. The project also supports PPRP's request for the project to be required to submit any proposed changes for further review, allowing PPRP to submit revised conditions prior to the start of construction. The project hasn't made any changes at this time. And if that remains the case, we would expect to work with PPRP to facilitate the updated conditions to be more in line with their conditions from more recent projects. But we agree that if changes are made to the project such that it is inconsistent with the CPCN, that the conditions would need to be updated to reflect that. PPRP's proposed update process is in line with the extensions granted in case numbers 9370 and 9400, which both required PPRP to submit revised conditions at a later date after the extension was granted. We expected that to be the case for this project as well, and we support PPRP's request on that front. Again, we thank PPRP and staff for their support. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bugelmans. We'll begin with Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go back to Mr. Wolfson first. Mr. Wolfson, staff's recommendation kind of perplexes me a little bit, not from the subject matter content of this case, but from a process perspective. So normally the conditions set by PPRP are done prior to the approval of the commission or disapproval, whatever the case may be, of the CPCN. But in this instance, we're going to approve the CPCN, and then MEA or PPRP may come behind us and change the conditions for a CPCN we've already approved. So as a matter of process, explain to me how that works, how we could approve a CPCN for an amorphous group of conditions, maybe, arguably. I mean, there's no limitation on new conditions now, and there's an approved CPCN and
Well,
conditions.
I think we've heard PPRP's conditions from Mr. Towson. And in fact, staff,
I disagree with you. Might have to change conditions, but he didn't commit hard to. These are the only things we're gonna make. We're authorizing new conditions, and there's no check on it.
well, I'm having trouble hearing you. I heard about 10% of what you had to say, Commissioner. I apologize.
So let's try it again. We'll be patient.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Mr. Executive Secretary, can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner, I can hear you.
Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I couldn't hear your response. Can you hear me?
I could hear you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Now, Mr. Wilson, can you hear me?
I can now, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So the question is this: you recommend that we approve this CPCN subject to any changes down the road that PPRP may make to this condition. I'm asking a question about process, not this case, but process in general. Normal process is we approve a CPCN after the conditions are set and agreed to, or disapprove it, whatever the case may be. But in this instance, we're being asked to approve a CPCN, and then the conditions may change to something arguably, notwithstanding what Mr. Tolson has said, to something that we don't know what they are. How does that process work?
Well, as I said before, that certainly wasn't the intention of staff. Staff's referring to any new conditions proposed by the Powerplant Research Program referred to what we anticipated the conditions would be, and those were the conditions that Mr. Tolson just stated, that there be a submission and of the new agreements. And
He didn't say what the new conditions would be. He said so we can check and see if anything has changed and may require new conditions. But we don't know what the new conditions are, or maybe.
well, good point. But well, then I guess we would have to ask them to come back in and approve them at the time any new conditions are offered.
So, okay, I wanted to get staff's perspective on that because that's my question for MEA.
May I provide a clarification on that, Commissioner?
Yep, I'm coming to you next anyway, Mr. Tolson. Go ahead.
Okay, that was the intent. There already is a CPCN, and it would never be the intent of PPRP to unilaterally try to change conditions. What we're saying is that because this project's already 3 years down the road, and it could be another 3 years, and things change very rapidly in the energy development industry, PPRP would like an opportunity when construction commences to review the project and see if there have been any changes. If so, PPRP would then need a period of time to formulate revised suggested conditions, submit them to the commission for consideration and approval or rejection, and then that would constitute an amended set of conditions, which is Appendix A to the original CPCN. If Mr. Bugelman's is correct and absolutely nothing changes, it may be that we simply recommend to the commission that we have updated conditions because PPRP's been learning lessons as time goes on and has refined its conditions for these solar generating facilities, and would want to make sure that we have state-of-the-art protections for the citizens of Maryland in those. But it would ultimately be the commission's authority and decision.
But that's not what this motion says or this recommendation says. It says subject to any conditions that the PPRP may come up with. And I appreciate your argument and your assurances, but that's not the written motion. And I'm reluctant, with all due respect, to pre-authorize um, incursions into processes that the commission kind of loses control of. In other words, arguably, these conditions could be changed in another case, in another set of circumstances, in a way that the commission disagrees with, but we've already authorized that to occur by authorizing subject to any conditions that you may apply later. And I know that's not your intent here, but it is what the recommendation does, I think, from a legal perspective. And I'm not a lawyer. I played one in the legislature at one point, but I'm not a lawyer. But I think we're authorizing this ahead of time, so you can come up with any condition you want, and we've already authorized.
Well, the point is well taken, and I'll leave it to staff as to whether or not they want to amend theirs, because that I've stated what the intent of PPRP was, and it certainly was not to have a pre-authorized carte blanche.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. And I don't think that was the intent of staff either. But that doesn't change the fact that that's what the words say.
Well, if I might add, Commissioner, we could amend the recommendation to say, rather than subject to any new conditions proposed, to something like subject to the review and approval of the commission to any new conditions proposed by the power plant research program.
Yeah, I think some language, Mr. Chairman, that says recommended to and approved by the commission instead of determined by PPRP would be a more robust process. That way, the commission keeps control of the process and doesn't precede it to some other agency.
As I understand it, it could be even more narrow than that, because PPRP is only asking for an updated site plan prior to construction. Is that my understanding, Mr. Towson? And it sounds like the developer agrees.
Not just a site plan, Mr. Chairman, but also an amended application if there are changes. In other words, if something changes from the original application, different solar panels are going to be used, perhaps their output is different. If any of the interconnection facts change, PPRP would like an opportunity to get the most recent and accurate information prior to the start of construction, review it, and then suggest any new or amended conditions to the commission for your act.
Okay, so it's more than just the review. I think an easy fix to the motion would just be to subject that all to commissioner approval.
We agree.
Okay, no,
Mr. Chairman, I have a related question, if I might, if Commissioner O'Donnell's finished. If he's not, I'll wait.
No, I defer. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had similar questions, and mine relate also to timing, Mr. Tolson, because your letter says when Mason-Dixon decides to begin construction, be required to file an updated application and supporting documents. Is there any need for a period of time? I mean, because the way that's written, it could be 2 days before they begin construction, and I'm sure Mr. Bugemans will assure me that that's not what they intend. But is there a time period in which they would need to provide you documents so that you can do the review, it can come before the commission can approve it? Is there any sort of a timing issue that we potentially face here?
Well, there is. I guess until we see what they're planning to do, it's difficult to determine how much time we would need to review. I mean, if there was a few minor changes, we might be able to do that in a couple of weeks. What we thought was, and I believe our letter stated, is allow PPRP an opportunity to review their submission, then come to the commission and ask for a set period of time to then provide recommended revisions, amendments, or whatever, and then set the matter for a hearing and resolve it. Meantime, they would not start construction until that process was completed and approved by the commission. That was PPRP's intent, and Sean Siemens on the line. If he thinks differently, I don't want to put words in my client's mouth, but I believe that's what's expressed in our letter, and that's our intent.
I could provide some additional input on this as well, Commissioner. I think conditioning this I think making this simply required prior to the start of construction is enough to protect the commission's interests and PPRP's interests. I think ultimately, if there's a requirement for the project to engage with PPRP and complete this process and have the conditions submitted and approved prior to the start of construction, it will, I think, necessarily provide enough time for PPRP to do its work and for everything to be approved. So I don't think there's a need for specific, timeframes like 60 days or, a certain amount of time. I think, like many of the conditions, simply conditioning this prior to the start of construction would be enough here.
Okay, I think that's fine, Mr. Bugelman's, but the PPRP request didn't say approval prior to the start of construction. And I think in the discussion with Commissioner O'Donnell, that's what everybody intended. So I think that does in fact fix, if the commission approval has to come prior to the start of construction, I think that does fix the problem. Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner?
can I just ask if there are no changes, does the company still have to come back to the commission, or I just wanted to make sure we're not holding this up in any way, should there not be any?
As the motion would read, that they would not have to come back if there were no changes.
Okay, very good, thank you.
I just had one question, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner?
Thank you. For the company, Mason-Dixon Solar, you currently, your project is on a suspended mode with PJM. Is there anything else that's holding up the company from exiting it by November 17th of this year?
There's nothing holding up exiting the suspension, except for the fact that the project's still trying to obtain offtake for the output more generally. So they're still continuing with efforts to obtain financeability for the project. But on the PJM side, it's not a holdup on the interconnection or PJM side. It's really just a matter of trying to market the project and get things going on sort of other fronts in terms of development.
Okay, so in the comments, it appeared as though the company was hopeful that the market was changing a bit for the better, so that they'd be more likely to exit the suspended period really soon, between now and November. I guess I'm trying to make sure that the project's still viable, still planning on moving forward.
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. At this time, I'll propose a motion, and then I'll take a pause to see if there's any objections or concerns or further discussion. I'll try to get emphasis where I'm making changes. With respect to item 5, I propose that we grant the company's request for an extension of the construction and operational deadlines outlined within the approved CPCN, subject to review and approval by this commission of any new conditions proposed by the Powerplant Research Program, and subject to the completion and submission to the commission of all required new PJM studies and agreements. Hearing no concerns, the vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
I vote aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
I did that twice. Sorry.
All right.
Keeps everybody on their toes. I vote aye. The motion is approved. With that, with no additional business on the calendar today, have a great day. This meeting is adjourned.
Here.